was a young child, like 4 or 5 years old, I remember very clearly reading a book. And it was called The Boy Who Sang to the World. In this book, a boy would sing to the world, and he would sing their dreams come true. I lost the book, and then I started searching, and no such book exists. I was reading it in some other realm of consciousness. And for me, that's what I became, was the boy who sang to the world. I think that the entire human collective is in our dark night of the soul right now. The despair and the hopelessness of humanity is just breathtaking and beyond words. And the ecosystem is screaming, and no one knows what to do. My only hope is you hit that dark point of no return, and you are in it for a while, and then something turns. And new ideas will bubble up. New solutions will come forward for us to change the course of our history. And it will come out of the depths of the human heart and mind in a way that we can't anticipate. The ancient traditions, they all speak to it. The mystery in Genesis, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word said, let there be light. So before light, there was sound vibration or vibration itself. And in the Vedic traditions and of ancient India, Brahma uttered the sound Om, and everything came into existence. The first movement of a particle, when it starts to vibrate, it creates a frequency, and it's a sound or a vibration. From the smallest subatomic particle to the largest galaxies, including our bodies, it began with sound. I believe that we emerge from the infinite into the finite, and it's different experiences for each of us as we make that transition. Research clearly shows that one of the first senses to emerge is the sense of hearing. When we're little fetuses developing, we're hearing the world through the liquid medium of our mother's womb. For me, I was a forceps delivery, so my first experience of life in this planet was something grabbing my head and pulling me out. So I was in a kind of shock, and I think that shock extended past my birth to my early years, and I think this picture of me with Santa Claus captures the essence of my early experience in life. I mean, can't you just see him like, oh my God, where am I? I would say my earliest experience is swinging on a swing that my dad made for me from a limb of an oak tree. And I would stay out there for hours singing. And I would sing to the sun, and the sun would hear me, and I would sing to the moon. I would love to stay up when it got dark, and I would sing to the moon and the stars, and I knew they could hear me. And so I lived in a world where I could sing to beings and celestial objects, and they responded. When I was 12 years old, our family had a financial crisis, so we had to move into a teeny tiny efficiency apartment by the ocean in the winter because rents were really cheap. And there was a rec room underneath that had great acoustics. It would make like echoes, and I love echoes. And so I would go down there and sing, and we'd travel on the sound. I didn't know what I was doing at 12 years old, but I would just be lost there for a long, long period of time. And one day the door opened and a man stepped in that I'd never seen before in the complex, and he said, "I don't mean to startle you, but I came to tell you that you're going to heal many people in this world with that voice." And then he turned and left, and I never saw him again. This is Sawatika and Sawatikap. They're bodhisattva figures. They're from our love of Thailand. And so they guard the passage with amusing compassion. And to Kuan Yin. Kuan Yin is the one who hears the suffering of the world, sacred to the Taoist and also to the Buddhist. And then over here, we have the sacred frog, the king of the frogs. He's an amphibian, so he goes underwater into the depths of the unconscious, and he can also come to the surface. And we have the two frogs making out up on the hill. And then we have the creature of the woods. He's the guardian. He's like a druid figure. And this is one of my favorites, Our Lady of Guadalupe. Beautiful, beautiful being. And up here we have a figure that's hiding. This is Ganesh. He's the son of Shiva and Parvati. So it represents the part of us that can overcome obstacles. Our two gargoyles. This one watches people who come in. This one is still sulking. He's been that way since we got him, but we love him anyways. And then we got this for Halloween several years ago and just left it up. And I kind of like it. It's just a reminder.
The compass of your heart, yes, and the boat of man waits for you by the stream to carry you into the land of dreams.
Well, my mother was a professional singer, so that's where actually my voice came from. And she sang with the big bands in the 1940s. She was actually a circus elephant rider. And in those days, the circus would come into town, and she was the one who rode the elephant for that circus. And then when the show began, in between the acts, the big band would play and she'd sing. So she was always singing. And I just started singing in church and choirs, and then a crucial period came when I individuated from my mom and decided to get a guitar. And for her, that was an evil instrument because in the bands, the people that she saw playing guitar were drug addicts. So she thought that if I picked up the guitar, I would become a drug addict. And of course, this was the time of folk music, and that was really what I was moving into. So I had to save up my money because she refused to buy me a guitar. She said, if you're gonna have a guitar, you must get it yourself. One night I went into a lounge and they had like amateur night or something, and I played and they offered me a job. So I became a lounge singer. So I would play guitar and piano. So I performed at the place underneath a Chinese restaurant. And two friends of mine, Marty and Kim, helped run it.
And I think he was hanging sheetrock at the time, and went into this story about how his landlady was kicking him out. And then he sang, "Can't Find My Way Home." And so I went up to Marty and I said, this guy doesn't have any place to live. Let's ask him to live with us. And we did that night.
We did.
And he came and he lived with us for about a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah, a year and a half or 2 years. He was writing a lot of music at that point, and he really was hoping that he would make it as a singer.
I was really into pop rock, but I didn't have the resources to get to Los Angeles. I lived in North Carolina, so Nashville was closer. So I started writing country songs. And I went to Nashville and worked in restaurants and gigs, music gigs. And the really weird thing was that the record engineer guys, I would go in for sessions and they would say, you're really, really good. You're really talented. Just wait. Somebody's going to pick you up. It was autumn, early autumn, and I was walking across a cow pasture of my uncle's farm in North Carolina, and I sat underneath a tree. I folded my legs in like a half lotus. I didn't even know what I was doing. And then my hands went spontaneously into these mudras. And I'm sitting there underneath the tree like a yogi from Muskogee, and my hands are doing these weird mudras. I went into a deep place and the world disappeared. I had no sensory experience of the world. I thought it lasted for a few moments, but when I opened my eyes, the sun was setting. So several hours had passed, and several cows had wandered over and were staring at me when I opened my eyes. For whatever reason, a white boy is walking across a cow pasture one autumn afternoon and goes into a spontaneous yogic samadhi and experiences Satchitananda. And the impact of that was so profound that for hours afterwards, I was in love with the world. I could feel the love of everything, and I was in a deep place of contentment and peace. I didn't even know what samadhi was or what mudras were, and so I started to search for what the meaning was of that experience. I started researching and studying and discovered the mystic contemplatives of the Middle Ages. They were describing something of what I had experienced, but with, not the complete picture, but one of the roots of that spiritual tradition is contemplative and is an inner journey. And that's what I became interested in. So I went to a Catholic college for 2 years because I thought that I was going to become a Trappist monk. And I was drawn to the Trappist because they're a silent order, which would be ironic if I had become a Trappist with a voice and I would become silent. I went to the Mass and I was mesmerized and fell in love with the Mass, with the Latin and the incense and the gold and the pageantry, the stained glass. And then it just so happened that they did the Mass in English. And for the first time, I heard what they were actually saying. And I could not accept that reality because it was guilt and shame. Guilt and shame. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. I just couldn't accept that because when I went into these mystical experiences and I was with St. Teresa, or I was with St. Francis, or I was with Mary, I had a lot of experiences with Mary the Mother. There was no shame and there was no guilt from any of them. It was a pure agape, pure love, without any condition. So I was having these mystical experiences that were typical of people in the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries. And I'm living in a 20th century world. And that was a mismatch. So I left the church behind. And the quest was about understanding what mystical experiences were and bringing the human and the divine together. Can you bring them together? Sophia means wisdom. The Gnostics say that Sophia is actually the heroine and the protector of humanity. She's said to be the feminine counterpart to God.
Yes. Good.
I continued my education at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro, minored in psychology, and I was taking a class on psychosis, which is basically the mental state where a person is seeing things that aren't there and hearing things that aren't there. But I remember it was a spring day and I was on my way to this class and I had read the notes so I knew what it was talking about. And on either side of me are two angels, suddenly, out of the blue, complete with the friggin' wings. They're about 9 feet tall, with white wings, brilliant white, emanating white light brilliantly. Now, I was aware that it was a mental impression, so it was not a true hallucination. In other words, I was aware that it was coming from somehow in my mind, but I experienced them as physically real outside of me. And so I became absolutely freaked out, like, I'm going to a class on psychosis and two angels are walking beside me. What if I walk in the class and nobody sees them? Or worse, what if I walk in the class and people do see them? How do I explain them? And what was really weird in that moment was I felt this immense love coming from them that was just like melting me, but my paranoia about who they were and what was this and what are they real was so big. I said, you guys have to go away. And poof, they disappeared. I went into psychology, looking back at it, to discover if maybe I was crazy. And I found among my fellow students that many of us were in the psych department for that reason. I lived in an old dilapidated house that should have been condemned. I had a mattress on one corner of the room, and there was, half-written papers and books and laundry and food and dust balls and the whole thing of a student. And on the other side of the room, I had an altar and pictures of the saints of all the traditions I was exploring and a prayer rug, and it was pristine. And there was this tension between me as Tom, the person, and Tom, the aspiring yogi. And so really the quest was, how do you bring the two together? There were several incidences in my education at the university that were significant for me. One of them was the discovery that neurophysiology could be used as a language to explain mystical experiences. The whole time while I was going through my scientific training, I was going deeper into the mysticism of the East, the yoga of India, Taoism of China, Egyptian alchemy, Tibetan Buddhism. I was practicing every meditation from every tradition. I would sometimes spend 5 hours a day meditating different practices. And so I was changing my neurophysiology and not realizing it. So I had been doing Kundalini practices along with everything else, and it was spring. People were in the quadrangle throwing frisbees. There were high-rise dorms, and I was sitting there just enjoying everything. And then all of a sudden I hear this sound that goes right up my spine, like a snake. And of course, in symbolism, Kundalini Shakti symbolizes a cobra. And that's because as the energy rises up the spine, when it hits the brain, it spreads out like the hood of a cobra. And what it's doing is actually going through both hemispheres of the brain. And this Shakti, this immense electric charge, was going into my brain and just lit up all these centers. My experience was that the dorms became transparent. I could see through the walls, and I could feel every emotion of all the 1,000 or so students that were in the area, their hopes, their dreams, their fears, going into exams, all that stuff. And then I heard the sound again, and then another surge went up into my brain, and I felt really hot, like burning up. It's called psychic fire in that tradition. But I didn't know what it was. And so I start to walk back to the dorm. And as I'm going back to the dorm, my friends are going to lunch. And they're walking by me and say, come on with us, Tom. And I say, no, I can't. I'm going to go back and lie down. But what was weird was, it was like my perception was they were in a different movie. I could see the movie, but I couldn't step into their movie. I was another movie. So I'm hot. I'm so hot, I want to go to the dorm and just get in a cold shower. And then I'm getting so weak, it's like I have no energy to move. And I look to the right, and that's where the student health center is. And my dorm is about another 500 yards away, and the student health center is right here. And I feel like I'm literally, the life force is draining out of me. So I walk towards the health center, and literally the energy leaves my arms and my hands, and I have to crawl in the porch. I'm crawling in. I mean, this is really bizarre. I'm crawling into the health center, and I sit in a chair, and the nurse comes in, and I show her my ID. She takes my temperature, and she turns ashen white. All I remember is her eyes got really wide, and her color changed, and she ran off. In comes the doctor, and the next thing I know, I'm in a private room, and they're giving me, whatever medicine. I still, to this day, don't know what medicines they're giving me. Fortunately, I didn't say anything about a snake going up my spine or seeing through the walls of the dorms or any of that. What I presented was a fever. So they put me in a medical wing, not the psychological wing. And so for 3 days, I was delirious. Because my understanding of what happened was that the Kundalini had gone into an area of my neurophysiology, subtle neurophysiology, the chakra system and the nadis, where there were impurities because I had not prepared myself properly. I'd pushed the river. And for 3 days, I was in a state of delirium and a high fever. And I remember the images vividly to this day. There were 2 sets of them. One was I was on a raft floating on an ocean, a vast ocean with dark clouds, with sea monsters trying to grab me off of the raft and pull me down into the depths. That's classic Jungian psychology. The ocean, as the unconscious, was stirred, and emotions and all of that. And this went on for 3 days. And then the other vision was I would be driving along a desert in my grandfather's Ford. And I would see the sunset in the hub of the wheel, the steering wheel. And off in the distance was a little, like an adobe in the desert. And I knew that in that house was somebody who knew the secret of the universe. And as I got closer, it would hop away. and I could never get to it. And then I came out of the delirium. And I was weak for about 6 weeks to regain my strength from a premature experience with Kundalini Shakti. So I became very respectful of this primordial power.